One evening in February 2010, the McStay family, Joseph, his wife Summer, and their two little kids, seemed to vanish into thin air. Their cozy home in California looked mostly normal. Dinner was half-cooked, toys were left around, and their dogs were there but uncared for. But something felt wrong. The family's car was gone, their phones were off, and as the days went by, no one heard from them. As the police started digging into the case, they uncovered a mystery full of secrets and betrayal. What happened to the McStay family? And how did no one notice what was coming? Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Joseph Jr. were a joyful family, living in a lovely new home in Fallbrook, California. Joseph, the family's main provider, ran a successful decorative fountain business. February 4th, 2010, began as a regular day for the family. Joseph called his father, Patrick, to explain that he was running late for a business lunch. Meanwhile, Summer had been in touch with her sister, who had recently given birth, telling her that she was busy setting things up in their new home. Over the next few days, communication from Joseph and Summer to their relatives abruptly stopped. While some thought it was simply due to their busy lives and caring for two young children, Joseph's father, Patrick, found the situation odd. He had a close relationship with his son and wasn't used to being ignored. As his concern grew, he asked his other son, Michael, to check on Joseph's home. At first, Michael didn't share the same level of worry, believing that his brother was simply caught up in daily tasks and would reconnect soon. Patrick, however, persisted, and eventually, Michael agreed to visit the house. When Michael arrived, he noticed that the family car was gone, but their dogs were still at the house, seemingly uncared for. The doors were locked, but Michael managed to get inside through a window. Inside, things were off. There was spoiled food in the kitchen and popcorn scattered in the living room. Despite these oddities, Michael initially thought the family had gone on a trip. However, it was unusual that they hadn't told anyone, so Michael alerted the authorities to his brother's disappearance. The police found no sign of forced entry or violence, though it seemed the family had left in a hurry. By February 8th, the family's car was discovered abandoned near the border crossing between the U.S. and Mexico. Surveillance footage from the border showed a family of 4 walking into Mexico, but the video quality was poor, leaving the police uncertain if it was indeed the McStays. Further investigation revealed that Summer had recently searched for information about Mexico on her computer, leading to speculation that the family had left voluntarily. However, Joseph's father, Patrick, firmly believed that his son would never leave without informing anyone. Joseph's mother, after viewing the footage, was sure the man shown was not Joseph, based on his walk. Michael and Susan took over Joseph's business, while Patrick felt increasingly left out, especially as he was estranged from Susan and had little contact with Michael. Months passed with no solid leads, and the case was handed over to the FBI by April 2010. Unfortunately, the authorities still considered the family's disappearance a voluntary departure, resulting in a lack of exhaustive efforts to find them. The absence of any clear evidence of a crime also prevented police from obtaining access to Joseph's financial records. For more than 3 years, the case remained cold until November 13, 2013, when a motorcyclist stumbled upon a horrific discovery while riding in the Mojave Desert. He found what appeared to be a child's skull and promptly notified the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. Upon further investigation, authorities uncovered 2 shallow graves containing the remains of 4 people, 2 adults and 2 children. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Joseph, Summer, Gianni, and Joseph Jr. Alongside the remains, a 3-pound sledgehammer was found, identified as the murder weapon. Forensic examinations concluded that the family had died from blunt force trauma, likely having been tortured before their deaths. The autopsy revealed that young Joseph Jr. had suffered multiple severe blows to the head, while Joseph Sr. was found with an electrical cord wrapped around his neck. With this grim discovery, the case took a dark turn and was now considered a homicide. Investigators began reconstructing the family's final months by interviewing friends, family, and examining phone records and security footage. A key breakthrough came when security footage from a neighbor's camera revealed that the last person to meet with Joseph on February 4th was his business partner, Charles Chase Merritt. Prior to the discovery of the bodies, Chase had been interviewed by authorities, during which he claimed to have spoken with Joseph on the phone at least twice on the day of the disappearance. Chase had also told the media that Joseph was his best friend, and in one interview, he mentioned being the last person to see Joseph, a statement that raised suspicion among detectives. Chase's behavior after the disappearance was concerning. In an early police interview, he referred to Joseph in the past tense, saying, "He was my best friend." When questioned about this after the bodies were found, Chase claimed he hadn't realized he was speaking that way. Chase had also told police that on February 4th, he and Joseph had a business meeting over lunch to discuss financial matters. During that meeting, Chase said Joseph gave him physical copies of checks for ongoing projects. Further investigation into these checks revealed discrepancies. Digital records indicated that while the checks were dated February 4th, they had actually been written several days after the family disappeared. This led investigators to suspect that Chase had forged the checks to make it appear as though they had been issued before the disappearance. Moreover, detectives uncovered that Chase had a gambling addiction and had been stealing money from Joseph's business accounts for months. It was speculated that Joseph had discovered this, leading to tension between the two and possibly providing Chase with a motive for murder. Police later uncovered that Chase had also issued checks totaling over $21,000 from Joseph McStay's business account in the days following the family's murder. Merritt then went on gambling sprees, losing significant amounts of money in casinos. A bank's customer service employees also revealed to investigators that someone claiming to be Joseph McStay had called to request the complete deletion of his account and all related information. However, the caller failed to provide the correct password, so the request couldn't be processed. When authorities traced the call, they discovered it came not from Joseph's phone, but from Charles Merritt's. Further investigation revealed that on February 1st, Joseph had sent an email claiming that Chase owed him almost $43,000. Adding to this, cell phone data placed Merritt in the Mojave Desert 2 days after the McStay family disappeared. Authorities believed Merritt knew the area well, having grown up nearby. During the investigation, police also received a DNA profile from the McStay family car. DNA found on the steering column and gear shift matched Charles Merritt. With mounting evidence against Merritt, detectives concluded that he had murdered the McStay family. The theory proposed by investigators was that Merritt had killed the family with a sledgehammer, transported their bodies to the Mojave Desert, and buried them in shallow graves. He then drove the family's car to the border near Mexico, abandoning it there to mislead investigators into believing that the family had fled to Mexico. It's also believed that Merritt was the one who conducted searches about Mexico on Summer's computer. On November 5, 2014, Charles Merritt was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Though he vehemently denied the accusations, he was arrested and brought to trial. However, the trial faced numerous delays as Merritt fired several of his attorneys and even attempted to represent himself at one point. Over the span of 2 years, he cycled through 5 different lawyers. The trial finally began on January 7, 2019. Prosecutors entered the trial confident in their case, presenting substantial evidence linking Merritt to the murders, along with a clear motive. They argued that Joseph had confronted Merritt about the money he had been stealing from the business, threatening to report him to the authorities. Merritt, who had a criminal record involving theft and fraud, panicked, fearing a lengthy prison sentence. As a result, prosecutors suggested he decided to kill Joseph and his entire family to silence them. The prosecution believed that Merritt first killed Joseph and then lured Summer and the children to their deaths. After murdering the family, Merritt hid the bodies for 2 days, during which time he accessed Joseph's bank account and issued the fraudulent checks. On February 6th, he allegedly transported the bodies to the desert, dug 2 shallow graves, and buried them along with the murder weapon. He later abandoned the family car near the border, though his DNA left inside the vehicle would become crucial evidence. During the trial, the prosecution presented security footage that supposedly showed Merritt's truck leaving the McStay residence. However, the video was blurry, leading to debate over whether it truly was Merritt's truck. The defense seized on this and other inconsistencies, including the unclear location of the murders. Prosecutors could not definitively say if the killings occurred in the family home or elsewhere, such as the desert. Merritt's defense team argued that he had an alibi. His girlfriend at the time testified that Merritt was with her at home on the night of February 4, 2010. His daughter also stated that she remembered her father being home that night. As for Merritt's cell phone data placing him in the Mojave Desert on February 6th, the defense explained that he could have been in the area to visit his sister. Juanita, Chase's sister, testified that her brother frequently visited her, though she couldn't recall if he had visited on that specific day. However, prosecutors confronted Juanita with a recorded police interview from 2013 in which she claimed that Charles rarely visited her and hadn't done so for 5 years, which contradicted her trial testimony. The defense also tried several tactics to derail the trial, including accusing prosecutors of withholding evidence and requesting that key figures in the case be removed. However, the judge overseeing the case rejected these motions, allowing the trial to proceed. Chase Merritt's defense attorneys argued that the prosecution failed to thoroughly investigate other individuals who had motives to harm Joseph McStay. They pointed to 3 men they considered persons of interest, with the first being Joseph's brother, Michael McStay. When Michael took the stand, Charles Merritt's attorney asked him several pointed questions, suggesting he could be responsible for the crime. The lawyer inquired about Michael's relationship with his brother, to which both Michael and the rest of the family asserted that it was good. However, the defense raised doubts, questioning why Michael did not immediately go to check on his brother's home and why he was slow to report the family's disappearance. In response, Michael admitted that he hadn't been overly concerned at first, thinking his brother had simply gone on a trip with his family. The defense also suggested that the truck seen in the security footage could have been Michael's, not Charles. But a particularly strange detail that led some people to suspect Michael was that before the family's bodies were found, he told officers that he hoped they weren't buried in shallow graves. This statement caused significant debate, as the McStay family was indeed discovered in shallow graves in the Mojave Desert. Many found it suspicious that Michael could have imagined this scenario with such accuracy. However, Joseph and Michael's parents dismissed the comment as an unfortunate coincidence, while others found it highly unusual. In addition to Michael, the defense also pointed the finger at Joseph's other business partner, a man named Dan Kavanaugh, who managed Joseph's online sales. Dan, known as Dan the Hacker due to his computer expertise, worked with Joseph to promote and sell their products online. His compensation was a percentage of the online sales. Dan had previously been on police radar when his ex-girlfriend, Tracy, accused him of confessing to the murders in early 2018. Tracy's claims were dismissed, however, as she had a history of substance abuse and was on bad terms with Dan, leading the authorities to believe she might be trying to falsely incriminate him. According to Charles Merritt's defense team, Dan had a strong motive to harm Joseph. At the end of 2009, Joseph and Dan had clashed over profit distribution. Dan believed he was entitled to a share of not just the online sales but all sales, while Joseph disagreed and initially refused to pay more. Dan allegedly threatened to ruin Joseph's online business by redirecting his website's traffic to adult sites. Ultimately, Joseph agreed to give Dan more money, including his BMW and additional payments. The last of these payments was due around the time of the family's disappearance. After the murders, Dan continued to work with Susan, Michael, and Charles to keep the business running, but he later sold the company in June 2011, pocketing over $100,000. The defense argued that Dan's exclusion from certain projects and lack of payments could have pushed him over the edge. However, Dan had a solid alibi. He was vacationing in Hawaii with his girlfriend during the time of the murders. His ex-girlfriend testified that they were together on February 4, 2010, and posted photos to Facebook as evidence. While some people questioned the validity of social media posts as proof, the ex-girlfriend maintained that she had no reason to lie for Dan, as they were no longer together and had parted on bad terms. The police eventually confirmed that Dan had indeed been in Hawaii at the time of the killings. During the trial, the defense also brought up Joseph's ex-wife's partner, suggesting that he too could have been involved. Joseph had a son named Jonah with his ex-wife, and tensions between Joseph and her new partner had escalated prior to the murders. Nevertheless, the police ruled him out as a suspect. Despite the defense's efforts to shift attention away from Charles Merritt, by June 2019, the jury found Merritt guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. Before the sentencing hearing, the victims' families gave emotional statements. Patrick, Joseph's father, addressed Merritt, saying that Joseph had done so much to help him and his family, particularly when Merritt faced legal troubles in 2009. Susan, Joseph's mother, called Merritt a despicable monster who had brutally killed 2 innocent children, her grandchildren. She labeled him a coward and a baby killer. Summer's sister tearfully shared how their family would forever be scarred by the loss of their loved ones. Joseph's eldest son, Jonah, also spoke, recounting the devastating impact of losing his father, stepmother, and younger siblings when he was just 12 years old. After hearing these victim impact statements, Merritt asked to speak. Through tears, he insisted on his innocence, declaring that he did not commit the murders and did not deserve what was happening to him. "I didn't do it," he said. "With God as my witness, I will prove everyone wrong." He added that he loved Joseph and would never have hurt him or his family. Merritt's sentencing was delayed after he once again requested to dismiss his attorney, though the judge rejected this motion. His legal team also filed for a new trial, accusing the prosecution of misconduct, but this request was also denied. Finally, on January 21, 2020, after years of delays, the San Bernardino Superior Court sentenced Charles Merritt, then 62 years old, to death. Despite the death sentence, it is unlikely that Merritt will ever be executed, as California has not carried out an execution since 2006. Instead, Merritt will likely spend the rest of his life in the death row. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. At 6 a.m. on Monday, April 24, 2017, two local residents were driving near a soccer complex. As they passed by, they noticed something unusual lying in the parking lot. Initially, the woman and her daughter couldn't quite make out what it was from the car. Curiosity got the best of them, and they pulled over to investigate. What they found was shocking. It was the lifeless body of a person. After overcoming their initial shock, they quickly dialed 911. By 7 a.m., the police had arrived at the scene. They discovered the body of a young woman, lying lifeless in the gravel of the parking lot. The atmosphere was heavy, and it appeared that she had been there for some time with a pool of blood surrounding her. Prior to this tragic discovery, security cameras had captured the last moments of 20-year-old Haley Rathgaber. She had been seen getting into a car with a man. However, that same man was later seen returning alone that night. With no signs of struggle, investigators speculated that Haley may not have resisted her attacker. Yet, crucial questions remained. Was the man seen on the security footage responsible for her death? Her body was found lying in a position akin to making a snow angel, with the fatal gunshot wound being the only visible injury. Interestingly, the only other clue found at the scene was a blood-stained blue towel near her body. Despite combing the area thoroughly, no weapon or shell casings were discovered. The scene was a mess, littered with debris and trash, making the search for useful evidence difficult. Even more puzzling was the absence of any personal belongings, no wallet, phone, or keys. It was as though all traces of her identity had been erased. Thankfully, detectives were able to find one vital clue, a tattoo of a cross on her back adorned with a Bible verse. Recognizing this as a possible means of identification, they turned to the media for help. The rarity of violent crime in the area meant that news of the incident spread rapidly, leaving the community both shocked and fearful. In times like this, media coverage can be instrumental. Simply reporting that a body has been found might prompt families to check in on loved ones sooner than they otherwise would. One such concerned resident was Heather Collins, who lived in Evansville, Indiana, just 15 miles from where the body had been discovered. The authorities were treating the death as suspicious, sparking a full investigation. With the victim believed to be between 19 and 20 years old, Heather's concerns for her daughters grew. Fortunately, her younger daughters were found safe and sound, but her eldest daughter, Haley, was nowhere to be found. Haley's failure to answer calls and texts was entirely out of character, heightening the family's worry. Haley was known for being prompt in her responses, and the silence was alarming. Frantic, Heather and her other daughters began reaching out to Haley's friends, hoping to get any clue about her whereabouts. Their anxiety skyrocketed when they learned that Haley had missed an important exam at her university. As a dedicated nursing student in her second year, skipping class was something she would never do. Desperate for answers, Heather contacted a close friend and co-worker of Haley's, asking if she had any news. She also requested her to check on her on Haley's apartment. When she arrived, she noticed Haley's car parked outside, but the apartment door was unlocked. Despite this, there was no sign of Haley inside. Growing more anxious by the minute, Heather reached out to a detective friend from the police department, explaining the situation and seeking help. Shortly after, she was asked to provide photos of Haley's tattoos. Tragically, the worst fears came true. Detectives confirmed that the body found near the soccer complex was indeed Haley, using her tattoos to identify her. Haley Rathgaber was born on December 3, 1996, and lived an extraordinary life during her 20 years. Known for her maturity and natural caregiving instincts, she took on a maternal role among her friends. One friend recalled how she stood out not only because of her height, but also for her caring nature. It was no surprise when she chose a career in nursing at the University of Southern Indiana, aligning with her desire to help others. Haley was also incredibly self-sufficient. In high school, she worked at Donut Bank in Newburgh, and during college, she took a job at Texas Roadhouse, a local restaurant, to support herself financially. But work was more than just an income source. It was where she built a close-knit group of friends, many of whom she had known since high school. This tight group, known as the Radies, spent a lot of time together celebrating birthdays and creating cherished memories. However, it was possible that someone from Haley's trusted circle might have harmed her. For her family, there was one person in particular who raised concerns. Haley's mother revealed to detectives that her daughter had recently been in a tense situation with one of her friends, a revelation that surprised investigators. Haley was the godmother to 10-month-old Jackson, the son of her longtime friend Jordan Hughes. Haley adored being a godmother, relishing the opportunity to spend time with a baby without having to raise one herself. With Jackson's father out of the picture and Jordan working hard to support her family, the baby was often cared for by Jordan's boyfriend. He took on the role of father figure and was also a friend of Haley's and other members of their group. However, just days before Haley's murder, on April 10, 2017, a tragic accident occurred. While Jordan's boyfriend had Jackson in a car seat, he reportedly tripped over a diaper bag, causing the baby to fall down the stairs at their apartment. Jackson was rushed to the hospital and was in critical condition. Upon hearing the news, Haley and her friends hurried to the hospital to support Jordan. They brought her food and comforted her during the difficult time. Later, they returned to Haley's home to grab clean clothes, but something unusual caught their attention. As soon as they entered, they noticed the diaper bag sitting beside the couch, contradicting Jordan's boyfriend claim that it had caused him to trip and fall down the stairs. This discovery led the group to suspect that the man might have been hiding something. While many still embraced him, they couldn't shake their growing distrust, particularly because of his bad reputation in town and previous run-ins with the law. The tragic incident with Jackson only intensified their suspicions. Sadly, Jackson did not survive the fall, passing away after 2 days in intensive care. During police questioning, Jordan's boyfriend's inconsistent version of events raised further doubts, especially since Jackson's injuries didn't align with the type of fall that he had described. Haley was torn about what to do. She debated whether to share her suspicions with the police. She had even mentioned to friends that if the police wanted to talk to her, she would be willing. In fact, the police had spoken to her just days before her murder. If she had revealed or was about to reveal something that could implicate Jordan's boyfriend, it would have provided a strong motive for him to harm her. There were additional circumstances that heightened suspicion surrounding him. When detectives interviewed Haley's co-workers at the restaurant, they learned that on Sunday, April 23, 2017, after finishing her shift, Haley had been invited out for drinks with friends but declined. Instead, she planned to go to the library with a friend. However, those plans changed when she decided to visit Jordan to pick up her wallet. At the time, Jordan was at his boyfriend's brother's house. This location became the last known place where Haley was before her body was found. These events triggered alarm bells for both Haley's mother and the detectives. With such serious charges looming over Jordan's boyfriend, whose name was Thaddeus Rice, he had both the motive and the opportunity to commit the crime. Adding to the suspicion, the day after Haley's tragic death, her mother received a Snapchat video showing Rice brandishing a firearm. The disturbing footage intensified concerns about his potential involvement. Social media also buzzed with rumors implicating Rice in Haley's murder. With all these incriminating pieces falling into place, investigators were closing in on Thaddeus Rice and knew it was time to question him. However, when interrogated, Rice invoked his right to remain silent and requested legal representation, deepening suspicions about his involvement. His refusal to cooperate only made the detectives more wary. Jordan provided an alibi for Rice, stating that both of them had spent the night at Rice's brother's house, but the detectives weren't convinced they were any closer to making an arrest. With little physical evidence to go on, Haley's family was left grieving as they began the painful process of preparing for her funeral. Heather couldn't shake the anxiety that the person who killed her daughter might even show up at the candlelight vigil being held in her honor. However, the vigil also gave investigators a chance to observe everyone in attendance, hoping to catch any suspicious behavior. Despite these efforts, the case seemed to be stalling. Then, a call came in from one of Haley's closest friends, another member of the Radies. He recounted his activities from the night of April 23rd, explaining that after work, he spent time with another coworker. Later, he received a text from Haley asking him to come by her apartment. After a brief visit, Haley asked him to drop her off at Newburgh Docks, a local landmark just a few miles from the soccer field where her body was later found. Concerned but not wanting to pry, he obliged and left without questioning her further. He tried to reach her by text that night but received no response. This information gave detectives a clearer timeline of Haley's movements the night of her murder. They turned their focus to another friend, Jack, who lived near the Newburgh Docks. Jack added that Haley had planned to meet someone that evening. Despite searching Jack's home, investigators found no evidence linking him to the crime. Surveillance footage from a nearby Walmart also corroborated both men's alibi, leaving detectives without sufficient evidence to move forward. As the investigation grew more complex, the police discovered another potential lead. A Texas Roadhouse employee had reportedly dropped off blood-stained clothing at a local dry cleaner. Investigators immediately began looking into who this person was and whether they could be connected to the case. The clothing in question belonged to James Wetson, a cook at the restaurant. When detectives questioned James, who usually kept to himself at work, he provided a straightforward explanation for the blood, stating that he had cut himself earlier that week. Detectives then took DNA swabs from James and sent them, along with the clothing, to the lab. Unfortunately for the detectives, the results brought no new leads. The clothing only contained James's DNA, confirming his story and clearing him as a suspect. With the third suspect eliminated, investigators continued to focus on the remaining two suspects, even enlisting help from the FBI. Then, an unexpected twist changed everything. Nearly a week after Haley's murder on April 29, 2017, the FBI made a significant breakthrough. While Haley's cell phone remained missing, they had managed to retrieve her call records. Investigators were eager to know about her last phone activity, so they began tracking the phone's location to create a rough timeline. Their next step was to figure out who Haley had been communicating with. The call logs revealed a startling discovery. Haley had been in contact with Isaiah Hagen. This revelation prompted detectives to pull Isaiah's phone records as well, and what they uncovered was shocking. Isaiah's movements mirrored Haley's. According to the phone activity, Isaiah met with Haley at her apartment around 10:30 p.m. on April 23, 2017. Together, they traveled east of Evansville, arriving at the soccer field around 11 p.m. This directly contradicted Isaiah's previous statement to the police, where he claimed to have dropped Haley off at a different location. Haley's phone went offline at the soccer complex around 11:25 p.m., around the same time Isaiah's phone also left the area. Interestingly, Haley's phone briefly reappeared near southwest Evansville at around 3 a.m., but shut off again after 20 minutes, never to be turned on again. With conflicting stories, detectives turned to surveillance footage from Haley's apartment. The footage showed Haley getting into a car with Isaiah, but when he returned in the early morning to check Haley's car, he was alone. But detectives had more than just location data and surveillance footage to aid their investigation. Typically, text messages aren't fully available. Only a record of them being sent remains. However, in this case, they were able to retrieve the actual contents of the messages, and Isaiah's texts were damning. It turned out that Isaiah had a history of bouncing checks, with his father having to bail him out financially. On the night of Haley's murder, Isaiah had been texting his father about the money he owed while he was at the soccer field. Sadly, Isaiah's father wasn't aware of the full extent of his son's sinister plan to get the money back. Detectives discovered that Isaiah had resorted to various means to make ends meet. He had been stealing from his roommates and pawning their belongings at local shops. Eventually, his roommate kicked him out. Furthermore, Isaiah owed Haley $600, money she had lent him to cover his rent shortly before her murder. Additionally, he had forged 2 checks from her checkbook, each for $300, one of which bounced due to insufficient funds. Haley had confided in her friends about the stolen checks, even showing them an image of the check made out to Isaiah for $300 worth of groceries. Despite being understandably upset, Haley's compassionate nature led her to forgive him, and their friendship endured. Whether money was the motive that turned Isaiah from a petty thief into a cold-blooded killer on the night of April 23, 2017, remained uncertain. Ironically, the individual who had initially appeared as a concerned friend had now become the prime suspect. To gather more evidence, detectives obtained a warrant to search Isaiah's residence. He lived with his parents, who were speechless when detectives informed them that their son was a suspect in the murder of Haley. According to his parents, Isaiah had always been well-behaved, shy, kind, happy, easygoing, and eager to please. Everyone loved him. They insisted that Isaiah had been devastated by Haley's death, describing how he collapsed on the floor, consumed by grief. They also claimed they were unaware of Isaiah's financial struggles and found it unimaginable that he could resort to murder for money. However, the evidence told a different story. During the search, detectives found that Isaiah's father owned several firearms. The Hagans confirmed that a pistol was missing from their home, but couldn't explain how it had disappeared. The search continued, and detectives uncovered even more incriminating evidence. A towel that closely resembled the one found at the scene where Haley's body was discovered. The evidence seemed convincing enough for authorities to bring Isaiah in for a formal interrogation. The police had him sit down and informed him that they needed to talk, signaling that the investigation had taken a serious turn. Initially, Isaiah stuck to the same story he had told earlier. He had picked Haley up from her apartment and dropped her off near the dam where she was supposed to meet someone. He claimed he wasn't sure if this had happened on Friday or Saturday, recounting how Haley had assured him she was fine when he left. That's when detectives confronted Isaiah with the cell phone data evidence. They showed him a video illustrating the movements of both his and Haley's phones on a map of the area around the soccer complex, highlighting the timeline of events. Faced with this undeniable evidence, Isaiah's story began to change. He admitted to taking Haley to the soccer field but insisted that he left her there with all her belongings intact. Yet, even this version didn't align with the location data. Isaiah claimed that the only explanation he could think of was that Haley's phone had somehow stayed in his car. Ultimately, he admitted to having Haley's phone with him all night. He said he threw it out of his car window the following morning because he feared getting into trouble if anyone found it on him. He explained that this was why he had kept quiet earlier, apologizing and stating that he omitted the information out of fear. When asked why he was in Haley's car in the early hours of April 24th, he explained that Haley had given him cash and asked him to sell some concert tickets she had. She had also handed over her keys, including those for her car and apartment, so he could retrieve the tickets. Following her instructions, Isaiah said he went to Haley's apartment, searched her car for the tickets, and then entered her apartment, where he found them. He then specified the area where he had discarded the phone. Still, he did not confess to killing Haley, maintaining that he would never hurt her. But detectives weren't swayed by his denials, convinced they had the right man. With the evidence against Isaiah mounting, he was charged with murder, robbery, and obstruction of justice. As Isaiah became the primary suspect, the other two suspects were exonerated. Soon, he was behind bars, awaiting trial. After a mistrial in the first case, Isaiah's second trial began on May 30, 2018. The prosecutor acknowledged that the case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, but he pointed to Isaiah's lies, evident in the interrogation tapes, as damning proof of his guilt. While defense attorney conceded that Isaiah had lied about certain details, he took a different approach. He emphasized that Isaiah never confessed to the murder and that no physical evidence linked him to the crime. He even suggested an alternative suspect, arguing that the authorities should have focused more on Rice, who had since been charged with the murder of baby Jackson. The defense also noted that phone data placed Isaiah miles away from the soccer field when Haley's phone became active around 3 a.m., showing that he couldn't have been near the same cell tower as Haley. Despite this, the prosecution offered another theory. When a phone is turned back on, it reconnects to the last cell tower it was connected to before being powered off. This, they suggested, explained why it seemed like Haley's phone had been moving. Although this was just a theory, detectives remained convinced that no one else was involved besides Isaiah Hagan. Then, a key development emerged during the trial. The prosecution called Isaiah's mother to the stand, and she made a shocking revelation. She testified that while Isaiah was in custody, he had confessed to her that he killed Haley accidentally and didn't mean to murder her. The prosecutor expressed strong confidence in her testimony, asserting that he had never had more faith in someone's words than in those of a mother willing to testify against her own son. This unexpected testimony gave the prosecution a significant advantage. However, the defense wasn't ready to concede, arguing that Isaiah's mother's testimony couldn't be trusted due to her personal motivations. During cross-examination, she admitted that she believed the jury wouldn't convict Isaiah of murder if they heard him say it was an accident. The prosecution countered this by questioning whether she, as a corrections officer, would resort to such tactics to protect her son. After hearing all the evidence, the jury delivered their verdict on June 25, 2018, finding Isaiah guilty. On August 2, 2018, 23-year-old Isaiah Hagan was sentenced to 60 years in prison. While some sense of justice was achieved, the outcome was still a painful reminder of the tragedy and a void that would forever linger in the hearts of those who cherished Haley. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On the afternoon of March 24, 2015, a 30-year-old man named Aaron Quinn reported that his girlfriend, Denise Huskins, had been kidnapped from their bedroom the previous night. Local authorities responded quickly, heading straight to the apartment where the incident took place. Upon arrival, the officers encountered a puzzling crime scene. The screen near the back door had been slashed with a knife, and the door lock appeared to have been tampered with, suggesting a forced entry. The bedroom on the second floor was in complete disarray, with blankets and sheets piled haphazardly on the bed. On the floor, they found unusual items: swim goggles taped shut and an empty bottle of cough syrup. But what stood out most was a square section of the bedroom floor outlined with red tape, within which a chair had been placed, seemingly positioned to face something. Oddly enough, a camera had been set up directly in front of the chair, yet it was unplugged and not connected to the internet, serving no apparent purpose other than decoration. No fingerprints or other DNA evidence were found at the scene, and no signs of a struggle were visible. When questioned, the neighbors claimed they hadn't heard any screams or disturbances the night of the incident, which added to the overall mystery. But Aaron's version of events made things even stranger. He recounted how he had woken up suddenly in the middle of the night to the glare of a flashlight. Dazed and confused, he noticed a red dot dancing across his chest, something that immediately reminded him of the laser sights used on firearms. Filled with fear, his instinct was to protect Denise, but before he could act, a masked man pointed a gun at his head and ordered him to bind his girlfriend's hands and feet with zip ties provided by the intruder. After Aaron complied, the man tied him up as well. The intruder then covered their eyes with the swim goggles, which were sealed shut with tape, effectively blinding them. Aaron said they were forced to hand over their bank cards, PIN numbers, social security numbers, and even their phones. The kidnapper then used their phones to text their bosses, explaining that they wouldn't be able to come to work due to feeling unwell. Things took a darker turn when the intruder made both Aaron and Denise drink an entire bottle of medicine, presumably the cough syrup found at the scene. The sedative effects of the medicine soon knocked them out. Aaron said that, after he lost consciousness, he was dragged to a chair positioned within the red tape square, and when he awoke, the goggles were removed. The intruder told him not to leave the square, warning that if he did, his girlfriend's life would be in immediate danger. Pointing to the unplugged camera, the kidnapper claimed it was monitoring his every move. To further manipulate the situation, he placed headphones on Aaron's head and played soothing music, a jarring contrast to the tense situation. After issuing his final threats, the kidnapper took Denise downstairs and vanished without a trace. Aaron, still disoriented from the drugs, remained in the square for hours, eventually succumbing to exhaustion and falling asleep. It wasn't until the following afternoon that he woke up, cut the zip ties binding him, and finally called the police. The officers who interviewed Aaron were left baffled by his bizarre story of abduction. Every detail seemed to defy logic, making them question the truth behind his claims. Drawing a square on the floor and forcing him to stay inside it? It felt like the kidnapper had seen too many Western movies and imagined Aaron was someone important. And Aaron had sat there for more than 10 hours without moving. The officers were skeptical. The biggest question on their minds was the motive. Why would the kidnapper go to such lengths to abduct someone? As Aaron struggled to convince the police that his story was real, a message suddenly appeared on his phone. It was from the kidnapper demanding a ransom. "See, I'm not lying," Aaron insisted. But the ransom amount, $12,000, was oddly specific. Whether it was a lot or not, the officers found it strange that the kidnapper would request such an exact figure. This made the police suspicious, wondering if Aaron could be involved in some way. Maybe he had harmed his girlfriend and was now playing the victim to deflect suspicion. Aaron strongly denied this, insisting that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. "How could I have sent a message to myself right in front of you?" he asked. But the experienced detectives weren't buying it. They knew about ways to schedule texts to be sent later. For the next several hours, the interrogation continued. Aaron was hooked up to a lie detector, questioned repeatedly, and even had lawyers consulted, but nothing conclusive came from it. Meanwhile, something else odd happened. The local newspaper received a voicemail from a woman claiming to be the missing Denise. She said she had been kidnapped but was still alive. To prove her identity, she mentioned her favorite band from her first concert and the name of her high school boyfriend. However, her voice was calm and steady, as if she were talking about someone else's situation, not her own. This made the police even more suspicious. Who could stay so composed while supposedly being held captive? The police then began interviewing the couple's colleagues and friends. What they uncovered was a scandal. It turned out Aaron and Denise were both physical therapists at the same local hospital. Even more shocking, Aaron's ex-fiancée, Andrea, also worked there. Aaron and Andrea had been engaged, planning a wedding, but things fell apart when Andrea cheated on him. Though they had broken up, the two still worked together and saw each other regularly. Even after Aaron started dating Denise, it seemed he hadn't completely cut ties with Andrea. Strangely, Aaron recalled that during the kidnapping, the masked man had repeatedly asked him for names, and at one point, even called him Andrea. Could it be that the kidnapper had intended to target Aaron's ex-fiancée, but accidentally took the wrong person? Despite this new information, the police remained convinced that there was no real kidnapper, just a love triangle gone wrong. They theorized that one or more people might have concocted this whole scheme to eliminate a romantic rival or add excitement to their lives. Though they continued with formal investigations, deploying search dogs and distributing flyers, their focus shifted increasingly to Aaron as a suspect. Aaron, clinging to his story, continued to insist on his innocence, but after hours of questioning, the police began to lose patience. Legally, they could hold him for 48 hours before charging him, so they decided to wait. Aaron wasn't put in a prison uniform, but he was given minimal food and water and confined to a small cell under constant pressure. Then came shocking news. Denise had been found alive. Media reports stated that she had been discovered in Huntington Beach, over 400 miles away from where the kidnapping was reported. While this might have seemed like a stroke of luck, Denise's sudden reappearance only made Aaron look more suspicious. Typically, kidnappers release their victims in remote areas, far from civilization, to create a delay before the police can reach them. But in this case, the kidnapper had dropped Denise off in an alley near her parents' house. When the police found her, Denise's wallet, cash, and credit cards were all untouched, which contradicted Aaron's claim that the abduction had been financially motivated. More importantly, no ransom had ever been paid. So why had the kidnapper released her? Denise told police that, after being taken, her eyes were covered, and she was brought to a small, quiet house where the windows had been completely covered with cardboard. She said the kidnapper, who wore a black hoodie, assaulted her inside the house. They stayed there for almost 2 days before the kidnapper told her to drink cough syrup, blindfolded her with the taped-up goggles again, and drove her away. Disoriented by fear and the effects of the medication, Denise couldn't tell how long they had been driving, but after being told to count to 20 and then open her eyes, she found herself near her parents' home. The police found Denise's story even more unbelievable than Aaron's. They required her to undergo a medical examination, particularly focusing on evidence related to the alleged assault. Surprisingly, her physical exam revealed no signs of injury, and there were no traces of male DNA on or inside her body. Denise explained this by saying that during the assault, the kidnapper's genitals had felt odd, as though they weren't real, possibly a toy. This led police to suspect that the kidnapper might not have been a man at all. The police began to suspect that Denise might have voluntarily left home and fabricated the entire story to avoid the consequences of her actions. How could a case so ridiculous be real? A kidnapper who didn't want money, didn't want the person, and simply held her for 2 days as if playing the role of a modern-day Good Samaritan. Denise refused to take the lie detector test the police insisted on. She angrily declared, "I'm the victim here. Instead of finding my kidnapper, why are you harassing me?" Her outburst only fueled the officer's suspicion. After all, why would a victim resist an investigation unless there was something to hide? Not long after, the police held a press conference. The chief, clearly annoyed, told reporters that the entire case had been a hoax. He accused the couple of wasting police resources and planning an elaborate kidnapping scheme for attention. Both Aaron and Denise were formally charged with fraud and public resource misuse. Suddenly, the once respected therapists found themselves branded as notorious scammers. Their jobs were suspended, and their reputations were tarnished. The local community turned against them, even comparing their story to the plot of a recent blockbuster movie. But the story didn't end there. 8 days after the couple's charges were filed, a small-town newspaper received a mysterious email. The sender, claiming to be the real kidnapper, mocked the police for being fooled so easily and vowed to continue targeting others. The email contained 2 photographs, one of a toy gun with a laser pointer taped to it, and another showing the corner of a room with windows sealed by cardboard. These specific details were never made public and were known only to the victims and the investigators handling the case. With years of experience in journalism, the newspaper editor noticed that the email was written with an unusually precise legal tone, different from what you'd expect from an average person or even two medical professionals. Yet, the police refused to acknowledge the authenticity of the email, suspecting it to be a distraction crafted by the couple. They argued that since the couple had hired lawyers, it wouldn't be impossible for someone to write the email for them. 3 months passed, and the case of the supposed fake kidnapping and the real fraud remained entangled in legal proceedings. Then, less than 80 miles from where Denise had allegedly been abducted, there was a home invasion and attempted kidnapping. When police arrived at the scene to gather evidence, they discovered something eerily familiar: swimming goggles sealed with duct tape. Due to the high-profile nature of the earlier case, the police initially thought it could be a copycat criminal, using the same method to blindfold the victims. However, after speaking with the victims' families, they were stunned to discover striking similarities between the two cases. This time, it was a family of three, the parents in one room and their 14-year-old daughter in the adjoining bedroom. The father was awakened in the middle of the night by a flashlight beam, just like in the previous case, and saw the same red laser dot. A tall man in a black hood pointed a gun at the father's head and demanded that he tie his wife's hands and feet with zip ties. Every step mirrored the earlier incident, but with one critical difference. The father did not comply. Instead, he fought back fiercely, using a bedside lamp to strike the intruder. Taking advantage of the situation, the mother quickly hid in the bathroom. The father then yelled to his wife to grab a gun from the bathroom, though there was no gun in the house, nor had either of them ever used one. The bluff worked, scaring the intruder, who fled the house. The father chased the man outside, where he saw him drive off in a white car. It was only then that the couple realized their daughter had been tied up in her room, her hands and feet bound, and her eyes covered. It seemed the intruder's plan had been to incapacitate the parents first, then abduct the daughter. Fortunately, the parents' brave actions thwarted what could have been a devastating outcome. Although photos of the family were never released, reports mentioned that the father was of Asian descent. Due to the intruder's hurried escape, the crime scene was not as carefully cleaned as it had been when Denise was kidnapped. The police found DNA from the attacker on the bedside lamp, as well as a suspicious Samsung phone near the door. The phone was registered to a 38-year-old Californian man named Matthew Muller. Additionally, the police managed to recover deleted text messages and photos from the phone, including the $12,000 ransom demand sent to Denise's boyfriend. Using the location data from when the ransom message was sent, the police tracked down a vacation cabin owned by Muller. They immediately went there and found a white car parked outside, matching the description given by the Asian father in the second case. Without hesitation, they entered the property and found Matthew calmly sitting in the living room, hands raised, saying, "You finally found me." He offered no resistance and cooperated fully during his arrest. Inside the vacation cabin, police discovered a room where the windows were sealed with cardboard, perfectly matching the photos from the leaked email and Denise's description. They also found a replica gun, duct-taped swimming goggles, zip ties, and cough syrup mixed with sedatives. In Matthew's car, they uncovered a crucial piece of evidence: a blonde hair strand tangled in one of the zip ties. And whose blonde hair was it? None other than that of Denise. What's more, the data from Matthew's car showed that he had been near Denise's apartment on the night of March 24th and near her parents' home 2 days later, exactly coinciding with the times of her kidnapping and release. All the evidence pointed to the fact that Denise and her boyfriend had been telling the truth the entire time. However, When the police showed Matthew's photo to the couple for identification, they both claimed they had never seen him before and didn't display any hostility toward him. They were completely bewildered as to how they had become involved in this mess. So the big question remained, why did Matthew commit these heinous acts? The key to understanding his motive lay in Matthew's background. Police investigations revealed that Matthew came from a wealthy family. His father owned a large accounting firm in California, ensuring Matthew had been financially secure since birth. Despite his wealth, Matthew didn't squander his fortune. After finishing high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, becoming a mechanic. His superiors praised his intelligence and diligence during his service. After leaving the military, Matthew was accepted into Harvard Law School, graduating with honors and becoming a licensed attorney. This explained why the newspaper editor had recognized the sophisticated language in the extortion letter. In 2012, a female intern at the law firm where Matthew worked accused him of sexual harassment. The case dragged on for over a year before Matthew settled privately, paying the woman a substantial sum. However, during the proceedings, the intern's testimony somehow leaked. She described Matthew as having deviant desires but lacking the physical ability to act on them, requiring tools to harass women. This revelation caused Matthew's reputation to plummet. His wife of 2 years also took advantage of the situation and divorced him. Afterward, Matthew left the firm and didn't renew his law license, effectively ending his legal career. He later tried his hand at sales but was soon fired for poor performance. The shadow of the harassment lawsuit haunted him, derailing his life. Though Matthew could have lived comfortably without working, he blamed the intern for ruining his career. His anger first targeted his ex-wife, but soon extended to all women. He saw the world as unfairly biased toward women, with both the legal system and public opinion siding against men. This sense of injustice fueled his desire for revenge, to prove that assumptions could be wrong. In the past 2 years, there had been over 30 reported home invasions in the San Francisco Bay Area, but nearly all the women who reported the incidents were dismissed as mentally unstable. Only 2 cases were filed, quickly buried among countless others. Matthew's appetite for humiliation grew, and targeting women alone no longer excited him. He found greater pleasure in humiliating men in front of their partners, not just causing harm but ensuring that they were ruined forever. If not for the brave actions of the Asian family who fought back, who knows how far Matthew's twisted plan would have escalated. After Matthew's arrest, his wealthy parents spared no expense in trying to absolve him, hiring top defense attorneys and even a renowned psychologist to argue that Matthew had severe mental health issues and possibly a split personality. But in the face of all these efforts, Matthew made a sudden decision. He chose to plead guilty to all charges. In his mind, he had achieved his goal. He had shattered people's trust in the police, the judicial system, and even women. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison for multiple offenses. As for Denise and her boyfriend, the fraud charges against them were officially dropped 2 days after Matthew's arrest. The city's police department issued a formal apology, and details of the case were finally released, clearing up the confusion. It turned out the entire narrative about a love triangle had been pure speculation by the media. In 2018, following a lengthy civil suit, the couple and the police department reached a settlement. They were awarded $2.5 million in damages for the emotional and reputational harm they had suffered due to the police's mishandling of the case. Fortunately, after enduring so much hardship, the couple married in September 2018. A year later, they welcomed their first daughter, followed by another girl in 2022. Now, the family of four enjoys a peaceful life in a small town, having moved past the dark chapter of their lives. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On January 17, 2014, authorities arrived at the residence of 52-year-old Hal Sasko, where they discovered his lifeless body. As the investigation unfolded, it was revealed that an 18-year-old woman had been living with him, a detail that shocked many as she was widely believed to be his stepdaughter. However, she was notably absent from the crime scene. When the full extent of what had transpired in the house came to light, the entire community was left in a state of shock. Sarah Gonzalez McLean was born on July 9, 1994. She grew up in the capital city of Kansas, USA. During her early years, she was homeschooled and never attended a traditional school. Sarah was a quiet and reserved girl, but also very kind-hearted and thoughtful. She had a younger brother with a disability whom she took care of, and a close relationship with her older sister. When Sarah was still a child, a neighbor abused her, causing deep emotional trauma. This event had a lasting impact on her life. She began to experience recurring nightmares, reliving the abuse, and would wake up in the middle of the night, panicked and overwhelmed. The constant stress and anxiety prevented her from finding peace. Around this time, Sarah started sneaking out of the house and drinking alcohol to cope with her pain. Her concerned parents decided to seek help by sending her to a psychologist, hoping she could confront her trauma. However, things only worsened, especially at home. Around the same time, her parents went through a divorce, which deeply affected her. Sarah described her parents' divorce as the moment she felt completely unloved at home. Over time, she lost all contact with her father, and her relationship with her mother became increasingly strained. Feeling like she no longer belonged at home, Sarah sought to leave as soon as she could. At the age of 14, Sarah found a job at a local pizzeria. The owner, Harold Sasko, was a middle-aged man who, at first glance, seemed successful and trustworthy. At that time, he owned 3 pizzerias and was known to be a devout Christian. However, his employees had a different view of him. They often spoke about his inappropriate behavior. The manager of one of the locations mentioned that Harold Sasko instructed him to only hire young, attractive girls. He was uncomfortable with this and would often warn the new hires to be cautious around the owner. When Sarah joined the pizzeria and received this warning from the manager, she was still quite naive and thought he was exaggerating. As time passed, Harold began to interact more with Sarah, eventually gaining her trust. He would pick her up from school, drive her to work, buy her gifts, and even encouraged her to confide in him, asking her to think of him as a father figure. However, Harold also instructed Sarah not to tell her mother what was happening. She obeyed, and her family never found out about their relationship. Alongside her connection with Harold, whom she began to view as a father figure, Sarah experienced another traumatic event at the age of 16. This time, it involved a close friend. According to her, they were on vacation together when he pushed her onto a table, breaking it in the process. He then assaulted her and even burned her back with a cigarette. This incident deeply affected Sarah, who was already working through her childhood trauma in therapy. The memories of her past abuse came rushing back. Sarah returned to therapy, and this time she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Things spiraled quickly. The stress and depression intensified to the point where she attempted to take her own life. As a result, Sarah was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for some time. There, she received therapy and was prescribed medication to aid her recovery. After being discharged, Sarah continued taking her medication and attended therapy sessions regularly. This support once again began to help her heal from her experiences. However, the situation at home remained highly stressful, and Sarah found it unbearable to stay there. By the time Sarah was hospitalized, she was no longer working at Harold's Pizzeria, but they had maintained contact. He would still pick her up from school, take her out for lunch, and ask her about her life. Being 50 years old, Harold saw an opportunity when Sarah was vulnerable and decided to exploit it. During this time, he repeatedly suggested that she move in with him. He was single, childless, and lived alone, with a successful business that was thriving. He told Sarah he could help her financially and even offered to pay for her college tuition. Despite being desperate to leave her turbulent home life due to the frequent, violent conflicts with her mother, Sarah repeatedly declined his offer. But in 2012, after graduating high school and turning 17, she finally accepted and moved in with Harold Sasko. At that point, it seemed like a fresh start. She believed that living with him would provide her with everything she needed. And in the beginning, that was the case. Harold bought her everything she required, enrolled her in college, provided her with a place to live, and didn't ask for anything in return. He showered her with gifts and was attentive to her needs and desires. Everything changed once Sarah turned 18. At that point, Harold began making inappropriate suggestions. He proposed that she enter into a romantic relationship with him in exchange for all the support he had given her. Naturally, Sarah refused. Throughout the months she had lived with him, they had pretended to have a stepfather-stepdaughter relationship to avoid any misunderstandings or suspicions. Sarah had never imagined that he would ask for such a thing. According to her mother, she had always disapproved of Sarah moving in with Harold, but Sarah had never listened. Many people close to them said that Sarah even called him Dad, which made his request all the more shocking. When Sarah refused, Harold became furious. He made it clear that if she didn't comply with his demands, she would no longer have a home or any support. Harold also knew about Sarah's history of substance abuse and that she had started drinking and using illegal substances at a young age. He exploited this by offering her drugs. Under the influence, Harold attempted to take advantage of her, and on several occasions he succeeded. Each time Sarah refused, he grew angrier, more aggressive, and violent. Harold eventually handed Sarah a list of all the things he had purchased for her and claimed that until she paid him back in full, she wouldn't be allowed to leave. He manipulated her, threatening to sue her for non-payment if she tried to escape. By this time, Sarah had secured a stable job, but earning minimum wage, she couldn't meet Harold's financial demands. Among the debts were 2 expensive cosmetic surgeries that Sarah had undergone at his urging. One was a rhinoplasty, and the other was a buttock implant. The second surgery caused her so much pain that she had to take medication for months afterward. Harold demanded $16,000 from Sarah. In addition to these debts, he also insisted that she pay him rent for the time she had lived with him. Sarah felt she had no way out. She couldn't return to her mother's home, as Harold had psychologically manipulated her into believing that no one wanted her back and that she wouldn't be accepted there. Her behavior changed drastically. Sarah was no longer the quiet, kind-hearted girl she once was. She became aggressive, avoided talking to anyone, and would lash out at the slightest remark. According to Sarah, her thoughts gradually shifted and she started to feel an urge to harm others. Her first step was visiting a pet store where she bought rabbits. Once home, she killed them with a knife, skinned them, and then ate them. Harold witnessed the entire event but said nothing. In fact, he laughed at her actions. If Sarah wasn't at work, she was at home with Harold, often under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and in a foul mood because of everything she had gone through. At one point, she began taking antidepressants, hoping they would help. Weeks passed, but they had no effect. She then switched to stronger medication, but those didn't help either. Eventually, Sarah spiraled into a self-destructive path, and it was only a matter of time before something tragic occurred. On January 17, 2014, police officers arrived at Harold's house. His co-workers had reported him missing after he failed to show up at the pizzeria for several days, and they had been unable to reach him. The officers knocked on the door multiple times but got no response. They then looked through the windows to see if they could spot anything, and one of them saw the body of a man lying in a pool of blood. The officers broke down the door to enter the house. Inside, they found several empty beer cans next to the body. Harold's body was taken to the coroner's office for examination, and it was determined that he had died from multiple stab wounds to the neck. Additionally, an analysis of the beer cans revealed traces of sedative pills. The police knew that Sarah had been living in the house with Harold, and when they found her phone, they initially thought she might have been abducted. Her age made them think she could have been taken against her will. Investigators later learned that Sarah had called into her workplace, informing them that she would be absent for a few days due to the death of a relative. They spoke with her family, and her mother mentioned that Sarah had been trying to reach her grandmother. The police traced the calls to various payphones located at convenience stores. Reviewing the security footage from these stores confirmed that Sarah was the one making the calls, and she was traveling alone from Kansas to Texas. With this information, the authorities realized Sarah hadn't been kidnapped and she became the prime suspect in Harold's murder. On January 25, 2014, 11 days after the murder, 19-year-old Sarah was found by park rangers sleeping in Harold's car in the Everglades National Park. Around 10:30 p.m., the rangers woke her up to arrest her and discovered she had a loaded gun. A search of the car revealed another firearm, drugs, a hatchet, and 2 knives. When arrested, Sarah wasn't immediately taken back to Kansas. Instead, she remained in Florida for questioning by several investigators. She offered no resistance and didn't try to fabricate any stories. Sarah quickly confessed to killing Harold and fleeing the scene. She explained that he had been harassing her for a long time, and she saw this as her only way to escape. Sarah detailed the events leading up to the crime. A few days before the murder, when Harold wasn't home, she went to a pharmacy and bought a packet of sleeping pills. On January 14th, 3 days before his body was found, Harold had the day off and was doing some repairs around the house. He asked Sarah to bring him a beer. That's when Sarah realized this was her opportunity. She knew that Harold wouldn't stop at just one beer, but would keep asking for more. After the third beer, Sarah started slipping sleeping pills into his drink. She explained that she waited until the third can to avoid him noticing any strange taste. As he continued to drink, she kept adding more pills, and according to the police, she gave him a total of 5. The combination of alcohol and sedatives caused Harold to lose consciousness. Sarah then quickly tied his hands and feet. At one point, she said, he woke up for about a minute and mumbled something. Sarah didn't quite understand him, but said she felt a moment of pity for him. However, she was determined to go through with her plan. She pulled out a knife and stabbed him multiple times in the neck, nearly decapitating him. After realizing he was dead, Sarah used his blood to write the word "freedom" on the bathroom wall. She then washed her hands, took a shower, and changed her clothes. Before leaving, she took money, a tablet, and Harold's car keys. Sarah left her phone behind, believing the police would track it and think something had also happened to her. She drove toward Texas, but didn't like it there because it was too cold at night, so she continued her journey to Florida. Most of the time, Sarah slept in the car, stopping occasionally to rest along the road. Upon arriving in Florida, Sarah visited a local tattoo artist named James Baker to get a new tattoo. It wasn't her first. She already had the phrase, "Only God can judge me," inked on her shoulder. For her second tattoo, Sarah chose a quote from a book, "The descent into the dark well at the bottom of our heart. In its cold, black depths, twisted and strange creatures dwell, best left undisturbed." Sarah had hoped that by cooperating with the police and sharing her story of abuse at the hands of Harold, they would show leniency and commute her sentence. However, this was not the case. The authorities painted Sarah as a true psychopath, while portraying Harold as a peaceful Catholic man who had only wanted to help her. At one point during her interrogation, Sarah admitted to one of the officers that during her fits of rage at Harold's house, she felt the urge to kill. The prosecution argued that Sarah had killed Harold simply because she wanted to know what it felt like to kill a man, not because he had been violent with her. A key piece of evidence found on Sarah's phone was a message from Harold apologizing for forcing her into a sexual relationship with him. However, this crucial information was not presented to the jury during her first trial, and all evidence of Harold's abuse towards Sarah was disregarded in the pursuit of justice. In February 2014, Sarah's trial began. Her attorney chose not to use the history of abuse as part of her defense, especially since the prosecution had chosen to ignore it. Instead, the defense team pursued a risky strategy, claiming Sarah suffered from dissociative identity disorder. They argued that Sarah had developed multiple alter egos to cope with the trauma she endured. However, this defense strategy failed to convince anyone. Neither the judge nor the jury believed the defense's claims. The prosecution presented a completely different narrative, focusing on the idea that Sarah had killed Harold purely to satisfy her curiosity about killing. They argued that the sexual relationship, while pressured by Harold, was consensual and unrelated to any form of violence. Moreover, the prosecution contended that the drugs found in the house had been purchased by Sarah, not provided by Harold, even though there was little concrete evidence to support this claim. The prosecution further asserted that Sarah had planned the murder in advance. Her phone contained several messages to her sister, suggesting that she had already devised a way to permanently get rid of Harold. Based on this, they argued that the crime was premeditated, requesting a first-degree murder conviction. Supporting this, investigators found Sarah had spent a month researching vulnerable areas of the human neck and methods of attack. On September 4, 2015, Sarah, who was 21 at the time, was found guilty of first-degree murder with premeditation. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 50 years. After the trial, the media uncovered much of the evidence regarding Harold's abuse and the testimony that had been withheld from the jury. it became clear that a significant portion of the truth about Sarah and Harold's relationship had been kept from the court. The reasons for this remain unclear, whether it was to preserve Harold's image as a quiet, religious man, or if the prosecution was simply determined to secure the harshest possible sentence for Sarah. This revelation drew widespread public attention to the case. In 2021, Sarah reached a plea agreement with the prosecutor, resulting in her sentence being reduced from 50 years to 25 years. Although she is still serving a life sentence, she will be eligible for parole after 25 years. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.